What you're about to see is absolutely stunning. One of the best debates I have ever seen on the Israel-Gaza conflict between Joe Rogan and Brendan O'Neill. Rogan, recently has been under fire for being incredibly anti-Israel, and yet he's been anti-Israel this whole time. Check out this clip where Brendan O'Neill actually educates him on the fact that Israel is the good guy and Hamas are the bad guys. Check it out.
The left in America and Britain, especially the kind of campus left, they posed as anti-fascists. And yet when something very like fascism reared its head again, they took its side. They posed as being on the side of women. And yet when women were raped and butchered, they turned the other way. They looked away, or they said it didn't happen. They denied it. They posed as anti-racist. And yet when a violently racist army whose founding charter commits itself to the murder of Jews actually murdered Jews,
Israel hasn't done itself a service in the response to it, in the way people interpret when we're talking about what Western civilization is doing. The destruction of houses, the destruction of everything, like the complete demise. When you look at what Gaza is, that fuels these people that think that this is an oppressive force that's destroying this culture, and the idea that it's okay because they have to get Hamas. That's what terrifies people, the justifications of the massive amounts of civilian casualties in order to just get these evil people. Isn't it more evil, even? It's numerically more evil, right? If you just look at the destruction of human life and homes, numerically, and not that you would want to attach a number figure to the value of humans, but they've killed far more people.
You literally are. You literally are making that exact equation and saying, this number of humans and this number of humans, and that side is right because they killed less humans. That is so completely retarded. I'm sorry. It's just a retarded way of looking at conflict in proportionality. It's like, in that instance, then you just have a bunch of people. The only just war you could have is when a bunch of people just kill each other, and it's exactly equal, and therefore it's a just war. Even if it's a completely immoral, one side is completely, genocidal and trying to, eliminate the other side is just defending itself. If the genocidal side goes ahead and kills less people than the one that's defending themselves, then the genocidal side is right. Like, that's how crazy the proportionality argument is. But watch how he dismantles Joe Rogan's argument.
That are civilians, that are women and children in the bombings of Gaza, then were killed on October 7th.
Yeah, war is hell. There is no question about that. One of the reasons I hate Hamas is that they started this war. And it's a war that no one wants. I certainly don't want it. Israel doesn't want it. The people of Gaza absolutely don't want it. So it's an awful, terrible thing. But I think I fear that we are living through one of the greatest inversions of truth and morality of modern times. Because what we have in the Israel-Hamas conflict is a situation where Israel suffered a fascistic assault, but it's Israel that is being branded as fascist. Israel suffered a genocidal assault by a movement, Hamas, that was literally founded with the express intention of visiting genocide upon the Jews, and yet it's Israel that's accused of genocide. Israel suffered the worst act of terrorism since 9/11, the worst act of racist violence in a very, very long time, the worst act of anti-Jewish violence since the Holocaust. And yet it's Israel that's accused of enacting a new Holocaust. So it's a complete inversion, I think, in some of the coverage and some of the commentary of the truth of the matter. And, in terms of what's happening in Gaza, it's unspeakably awful. There's no question about that. But I think one thing it's worth bearing in mind is that this is one of the most scrutinized wars of all time, if not the most scrutinized war. I've never seen this level of scrutiny. And I wish I had, in fact, in relation to the Iraq disaster or the Afghanistan invention or the Libya invention by Barack Obama and David Cameron, who was Prime Minister in England at the time. I wish I'd seen this level of scrutiny, but we didn't. This war is more scrutinized than any other. And I do worry that tragically normal things that happen in a war, which is that there are civilian casualties, in this instance are being blown up as proof of evil on Israel's part. So if you look, for example, at the aid workers from the food charity, Western powers condemn that. They said Israel's got to take more care. Israel's really becoming reckless. These are the same Western powers who killed hundreds of innocent civilians in so-called friendly fire incidents in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. In Libya in 2011, there were so many friendly fire incidents under Barack Obama and David Cameron that the pro-West rebels had to paint the roof of their vehicles bright pink in order to try and avoid the bombs of their so-called allies in the West. So all the things that people see as demonic and Nazi-like and pure evil on Israel's part are done by every nation that fights a war.
Right.
And it's
But
that
that's not
double
a-
standard.
But that's
the
not a
problem.
justification, right? What Jose Andres has said is that they intentionally targeted his aid workers. And that he's gone public saying they intentionally targeted his aid workers. They knew what those people were doing and that they killed them. This is like, because that has happened in war before.
First of all, how would he know? Like, how would Jose Andres know that Israel intentionally targeted them? Was he in the briefing room where where they basically said, hit that target? No, he wasn't. And so this idea that he can just announce, oh yeah, they intentionally targeted them. You don't know shit.
And we didn't have the kind of scrutiny that we have today. In no way justifies continuing that practice, right?
It's not a justification, but it's an attempt to understand why there is this such intense scrutiny on this war, in contrast to so many other recent modern wars. I think that's
Recent modern wars, but with the kind of coverage that we have with cell phones and footage that's available everywhere, I don't think so. I don't think there's nowhere near the coverage. It wasn't an urban environment in the same way when they were in Afghanistan, right? Other than Kabul and some of the other, there's not that many high population areas. It's a completely different scenario in terms of like cell phone footage and people being able to see the wreckage, fly drones over it. The capability technologically of covering it is very different, right?
I think that's true, but there have been recent wars where there was same levels of technology. The war in Syria, for example, which the Western powers were intimately involved in too, and the number of people killed there was absolutely huge, including Palestinians. Thousands of Palestinians died.
And what
in the
year
Syria
is this?
War. From 2011 onwards, right through till quite recently.
Don't you think there's a big difference between the amount of cell phone coverage available from 2011, especially in Syria, versus...
No, up until recently. You see, this is when he's saying 2011 up until recently, he means it's still sort of ongoing.
Israel and Gaza in 2024?
The point I would make, I think you're right. I think social media, the improvement in social media, or not, as one might see it, explains why we're seeing so much from this war. But it can't explain, in my view, the cultural interpretation of it amongst many in the woke West. And
right,
I think what's
because
happening
in the woke West, support for Palestine is ubiquitous. It's like
Yeah.
it's part of the doctrine.
and hatred for Israel is ubiquitous.
Colonizers,
Yeah, as
that kind of term.
the most evil state. You know, the thing that worries me most is that anti-Zionism, as they call it, I don't think it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, of course, just as it's not racist to criticize Zimbabwe or whatever. But we're not just seeing criticism of Israel. We are seeing hysteria about Israel, which I think is disproportionate and myopic and obsessive. And we're seeing it on the streets all the time. We're seeing it on campuses. We're seeing it on social media. This very myopic obsession with everything Israel does. And the thing that worries me is that what is presented to us as anti-Zionism is so similar to what we all recognize as the anti-Semitism of the past. It is undeniably similar. So in the past, what people said about the Jews is that they were uniquely bloodthirsty. They had their fingers in the pies of everything. They were controlling of our communities and our societies. They were a pretty demonic force and they're destructive of world peace. That's now all said about the Jewish state.
The funniest thing about this is that 6 months after this interview, Rogan hosted Ian Carroll, who is essentially the biggest anti-Semite on Twitter, and perpetuated all of these lies. And Rogan doesn't seem to see how he is part of the problem.
The Jewish state is uniquely murderous. There was a line in a Guardian column recently which referred to the war in Gaza as uniquely barbaric. They're seen as uniquely murderous. They target children. They love killing children. They are all-powerful. They have this hypnotic influence over the United States and the United Kingdom and other countries. They puppeteer these nations. They're so powerful. And they are destructive of world peace. It seems very curious to me that all the things that were once said about the Jewish people are now said about the Jewish state. And I'm not saying that everyone who says it is a racist, right? We shouldn't throw around the word racist willy-nilly. It's an important word that has real meaning. But I do think there is an element of bigotry, whether witting or unwitting, in this singling out of Israel for the most extreme form of moral opprobrium that is not directed against any other state, including states that do far worse things than Israel is doing. That's what I find quite curious and really worrying about the times we live in.
Right, but what they are doing is very troubling, right? The bombing of Gaza, the destruction of how many thousands and thousands of homes, how many innocent people died, that's still very troubling. All of it is troubling, right?
In every single war, more civilians than fighters die. This is
Right, but isn't this
proven
one
fact. And
extraordinary how quick it's happening as well?
It's very quick, but I think that the thing to bear in mind is that when people say that 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, the first thing to bear in mind is that that is a lower number than have died in other recent wars. The more important thing to bear in mind is that a large number of them, estimates say 30%, are Hamas fighters, though they are a member of the...
30%? Where have you heard that?
Well, I've seen people say that between 10 and 12,000 are Hamas fighters. But this is the problem. None of this information gets through, not even to the extent that we would then be free to discuss it.
Right. I think actually that's what Coleman said.
At this point, it's even higher, meaning it's even the ratio, I think, is like almost 1-to-1 or 1-to-1.2, something like that, where you kill 30,000 or 40,000 civilians, which would be like 18,000 Hamas members, meaning it would only be 22,000 and 18,000.
As well, right? He did say 30%. The number, whatever. I thought it was 50%. I thought it was more than that. Rather, I thought it was. It's hard to say, right? Because there's people that will tell you that Hamas over exaggerates the number of civilian casualties, and then there's people that say that Israel will target anyone that even is associated with Hamas as being Hamas, and so they exaggerate their numbers as well. But at the end of the day, for sure, tens of thousands of innocent people have died, right?
A lot of innocent people have died.
Tens of thousands. But isn't it quicker than most wars in the amount of people that have died so quickly? In most of these wars that you're talking about, whether it's Afghanistan or Syria, the amount of dead may be greater, but isn't it over a longer period of time?
That's true. This war is distinctive in some ways. Firstly, because it's in a very small area. Secondly, because we know that Hamas roots itself in civilian society. We know this for a fact. We know that it hides amongst civilians. We know that it disguises itself as part of those communities.
But that's what terrifies people, the willingness to kill civilians, knowing that you're going to kill civilians just to get to the bad guy.
But, this is the thing that really worries me about in the aftermath of 7th of October. I said to so many people, so many friends of mine and people I encountered in media discussions, I said to them, what should Israel have done? Nothing. They had just been subjected to the worst act of anti-Semitic violence in 70 years, more than 70 years. The slaughter, the butchery of entire families, the kidnap of hundreds of people, the murder of old people, women, men, children. What should they have done? And when people say, well, they shouldn't have gone into Gaza, they should have just relaxed a bit, or whatever people say, what they're essentially saying is, Jews, let yourselves be killed. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. It was only an incursion into your territory and a slaughter of 1,000 people. Why are you so het up about this? No society would put up with that. If an anti-American force came into the United States and killed whatever the equivalent number is, it would be tens of thousands if we took in population differences. No one, I hope, would sit back and say, well, whatever, it's fine, it's not a big deal. Israel had every right, I think, to pursue the terrorists that did this to its people and to pursue them with extreme prejudice and to put them down and to say, we will create a situation in which you will never be able to do this again. And of course, what's happening is awful, but the moral responsibility for it lies entirely with Hamas. They started this war. They're now refusing to end the war by giving back the hostages and surrendering to Israel, which is what they ought to do. And they're openly rejecting ceasefire options. So this absolution of Hamas, this absolving of Hamas of any responsibility for the calamity currently befalling Gaza, I find that very worrying too, because among some woke activists, there seems to be this view that Israel is the only actor in that region. It's only Israel's decisions that matter. And we can't possibly expect these brown people in Hamas to have any responsibility for what's going on. There's a curious paternalism to that. The truth is that Hamas is fundamentally responsible for what's happening, firstly by starting it, and secondly by refusing to end it.
But if you're talking to people that are reasonable, their objection is not that Israel defend itself. Their objection is the sheer number of innocent people who die by virtue of these strategies of just attacking populations where Hamas is embedded with civilians and killing all the civilians. And their objection is not that, that Hamas is good, is that the Palestinian people are innocent and that they're trapped under the ruling of Hamas and have been since, 2006? How long has it been?
Yeah.
That's not you're killing people that have nothing to do with that. You're killing people that are captured by their own government. You're killing people that virtually have no say in how their government is run. They have no say in what Hamas does if they decide to go across the border and kill 1,200 people. They didn't want that to happen. They didn't ask for it. They didn't participate in it. But yet they're getting bombed into smithereens. And this is the argument that the reasonable people have, is that, okay, you're not absolving Hamas from starting this, but are you absolving Israel from killing thousands and thousands of innocent people in the process of hunting down Hamas? And are you creating even more martyrs by doing so? Because how many people are losing family members? How many people are facing starvation? How many aid workers are getting killed while they're trying to help? At a certain point in time, you have to look at, is this the only way to do this? And you have to say, you're not absolving Hamas, but you are showing compassion for innocent people that are trapped by this murderous regime, and now they're getting blown to smithereens because these people embed themselves with them, and they create, the human shield argument, right?
Yeah,
I don't know if it's a good argument. I don't know if it's a moral and just argument for a superior society. If we really are morally and ethically superior, the idea of killing tens of thousands of innocent people to get to a few bad people, or how many bad people, who knows what the numbers are, right? But that disturbs the shit out of people, and when they find the numbers are grossly, it's like, what are the number of women and children that have died? It's a high number, a very high number. And they don't take comfort in the fact that they died by getting bombed instead of being invaded and butchered in their homes. They're dead.
But you know
what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying.
Both things need to...
Rogan here is applying the highest moral standard to these critics of Israel. I think that probably 90% of the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel movement actually don't give a shit about the Palestinians. They don't care about the Gazans. If they did, they probably would want them to get out of Gaza to avoid civilian casualties. But no, they care about the overall movement. What do I mean by that? They want the Gazans to stay in Gaza because they want them to suffer, and they love when they suffer, because when they suffer, they have a beautiful social justice movement to fight for.
Be taken into consideration, and when we're discussing this, it's like people have this ability to like sort of compartmentalize and not look at it in an overall. Like, if you took an overall assessment, you'd say the whole thing is horrible, but just because one horrible thing happens, it doesn't justify all this other horrific shit that's going on as well. Both those things kind of need to be addressed. And is that the only way to do this? The only way to do this is to kill tens of thousands of innocent civilians in order to get these bad people?
What I'm saying is that I think twofold. The horrors of war attend every war. That's a given. Every war is horrible and sick-making and hellish. That's a given, I think. But then there's another issue, which is the question of why a war is being fought. Is it being fought for criminal reasons and wrong reasons? And I think there are many examples of that, spearheaded both by your country and mine over the past 100 years. Unjust wars that led to unjust deaths. Are there also wars that are just and that are worth fighting? Yes. The war against Nazism, I think, was a just war. I think I can think of anti-colonial wars in which it was completely justifiable for people to rise up against British rule or American domination or whatever else it might be. So we do have to make a moral call on what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And that does involve rising above the differences in the numbers killed. It does involve rising above the horrors of war and trying to take a broader view which says, do we want Israel to continue existing? Do we want the Jews to have their own homeland? And do we want them to be safe from the fascistic menace of a neighbouring army that would like to kill them all and to destroy their state from the river to the sea? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. And if our answer to those questions is yes, then we do have to accept Israel's right to pursue Hamas. And then the blame for the horrors in Gaza has to lie at the feet of Hamas, which is with profound cynicism, placing itself amongst the people in order to then throw its hands in the air and say, look what evil Israel is doing. It's killing these people, even though they put themselves there for that express purpose. The cynicism of it, the horror of it, is unimaginable. And so I think to put it all on Israel, as some people do, to say this is just a demonic action by the Jewish state is wrong. Hamas bears profound responsibility both for starting the war, and also for putting Gazan civilians in harm's way, and refusing to pull the plug on the war, which it could do right this minute if it returned the hostages and surrendered to Israel. So we do have to look at who is morally responsible for this calamity, and I think it's Hamas. Now, the thing is, you talk about the numbers, and a lot of people talk about the numbers, and people will often say Israel has now killed more people than Hamas killed on the 7th of October, and that's true. But this is not just a numerical equation. This is not just something that can be done on an abacus or on a pie chart. This is bigger than that. This is a bigger moral conundrum. And there is no moral equivalent, in my view, between what Hamas did and what Israel is doing. Because Hamas intentionally killed people on the basis of their race. It intentionally stabbed people to death. It intentionally threw hand grenades into safety shelters in which families were hiding. It intentionally raped and stripped and murdered women. It did it on purpose, intimately, face to face, with knives and guns and bombs, because they are Jews.
Right.
That was a fascistic assault on Israel. What Israel is doing, and I don't accept the idea that they are purposely targeting civilians or that they kill those aid workers on purpose. I just don't think that's true.
So
So what Israel is doing, there is collateral damage to Israel's just pursuit of Hamas. And I just don't think there is any serious moral comparison between the intentional murder of Jewish people and the absolutely tragic, regrettable deaths of civilians in war, as has happened in every war in history. They can't be compared. So I do think we have to go slightly beyond the numbers, beyond the horror of it, which we see on our TV screens every day, and ask ourselves, what is the moral question at stake here? Does Israel have the right to exist? And if so, does it have the right to fortify itself against this anti-Semitic army that wants to destroy it? That's the moral question. And then there's a broader moral question for us in the West, which is why have so many of our young people in particular, and the educated elites, been sucked onto what I would consider to be the wrong side of this question? We used to think that education was the great guard against hysteria and regressive views. We used to think that education would deliver people from ignorance, deliver them from the prejudices that might have afflicted our less educated forebears and ancestors. But what we've had since 7th of October is very often the most educated people making excuses for the most regressive army on earth. And so it raises questions for our societies. What's happening in our academies? What's happening in our universities? What's happening amongst our young? What's happening on social media that is sucking people into this myopic hatred for Israel? Why are people like Aaron Bushnell burning themselves alive in the name of Palestine? We have to look at what's happening in our society and make a moral judgment there, as well as, I think, having a moral understanding of why Israel thought it had to pursue Hamas in this way.
Mic drop from Brendan O'Neill there. Yeah, maybe we should look at our society. The only thing I have a problem with is this categorization of something called collateral damage. Civilians dying is not collateral damage. Collateral damage sounds like you go into a store, you break a plate. Oops, I broke a plate. Like, that's a sort of messed up term to refer to civilians dying. No. Every single day, the IDF has a judgment decision that they make. Will this save more civilians than it kills in the long term, in the short term, etc.? And when they make that determination, they go ahead. It's the exact same calculation that the U.S. made when they thought about invading Japan versus dropping the bomb. They dropped the bomb because they assessed that it would kill more people if they did a land invasion. If they did a land invasion of Japan, many more people would die than if they dropped the 2 bombs. They dropped the 2 bombs. Everybody cried, terrible atrocity. I mean, at least now they look at it like that. And yet, more people were saved because of that bomb than would have been killed due to a land invasion. So anybody criticizing the nuclear bomb drops, anybody criticizing Israel needs to put up with the fact that they are the ones that want more civilians to die, not Israel and not the allies in World War II. For more, subscribe to the channel. If you want to help us make more of these videos, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/JewishUncensored. Thank you for watching and have a good one.